97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles insider John McMullen was at the press conferences today, and we got a lot to dive into, John. Let's start with any indication from Frank Reich. I know he doesn't really make the decisions, but did he give any indication one way or another, the left tackle situation?
No, the Eagles are refusing to acknowledge how they're going to move forward, although the word I'm getting is that Lane Johnson will stay at right tackle and Vaitai will be the left tackle. They're going to walk through today. You know, it's a little bit of a weird week because they played on Monday. So typically today would have been the big practice day in the normal week. It wasn't, and they're actually not going to be out there till about 5:30 this afternoon. And then tomorrow will be the bigger practice day. I imagine by that point, we'll know that they're going to keep Lane at right tackle and put Vaitai at left tackle, and we'll see how it works out. There's arguments for it, arguments against it, and that looks like it's going to be the Eagles' decision, but it's not official.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have their thoughts on who should be where, but any opportunity to talk to either Lane or Vaitai to see where they feel more comfortable?
Yeah, Lane spoke today, and he kept it close to the vest as well. I'm sure he does know how he's going to move forward. And he's always, remember, going back to the off season when Jason Peters was not here for voluntary work, when he was sort of angling for a contract extension that he eventually got, he spent the entire time at left tackle, and he was very confident in his ability to play it. He played it in college. That's the reason he was the number 4 overall pick. But Jeff Stoutland has always said, look, you can't just throw him over there with no preparation. And that's why you see in game when Jason went down, they went with Vaitai, who has taken some reps as the swing tackle, left tackle. And he always said you got to get used to the mechanics, the footwork, and things like that for Lane Johnson. And the Eagles would prefer, I think, to keep him where he is for 2 reasons. One, he might be the best right tackle in football, so why do you want to mess with that? And 2, all you got to do is look in 2 weeks with Denver on the schedule. Who's there? Von Miller. He lines up on Lane Johnson's side. So you want Von Miller against Vaitai? So the right tackle, left tackle thing that used to be such a huge thing in the NFL is not nearly as huge because you have guys like Justin Houston and Von Miller who line up on the opposite side of what really good typical pass rushers do.
Hey, John McMullen, of course, covered the league nationally, and there's some guys out there. Dwane Brown, obviously, in Houston. The trade deadline's coming up. Joe Staley's going to be in here this weekend. We talked a little bit about him earlier with Tehran, that they could keep their eye on him in this game. Brandon Albert's a free agent. He's a guy that was in Kansas City with Doug and Andy. He does not have a job currently. The scary part with him is he worked out for the Giants and Seahawks, and they didn't sign him, so I don't know what that says about him, but any thought that the Eagles are seriously looking outside of the organization, or are they pretty content with what they have?
Judging by their actions, they're pretty content, and I think that says more about the guys you just mentioned. Dwane Brown, which I kind of mentioned yesterday on the show, would be the exception, but A, you have to trade for him. B, he's still a high-level player. But he has held out all year, and he is 32, I believe, so you have age to deal with there. You have a contract to deal with, and you have to give him something in return that's, going to be pretty good as far as draft pick compensation. And the Eagles' war chest isn't great when you talk about draft choices because of all the deals they have made. So I think that's very unlikely. And for the same reason, the Staley, because of the trade, probably unlikely. Could you get a guy off the street like Brandon Albert? Yes, but there's a reason he's on the street. And I think the Eagles want to see what Vaitai has. I think they he feels more comfortable on the left side. I think it's a more natural position for him. It could blow up in their face, but I think you see, the one guy they brought in to work out was Taylor Hart. So, they're not panicking, and you never say never with Howie Roseman, the trade deadline coming up, but I just don't see a trade coming down the pipe.
John, let's stick with the offensive side of the football. You write a story on the website, 973ESPN.com, about Mack Hollins pushing for playing time. Mack Hollins had a big touchdown on Monday. Is it possible that, in the next couple games, even by the bye week, he can replace Torrey Smith in that starting lineup?
Well, I think he should, to be honest. I don't think Torrey Smith is very good at this stage of his career, to be blunt. And Mack has shown enough to be able to do what Torrey is asked to do. I mean, right at this stage, you got to be honest. And Torrey Smith is nothing more than a decoy, and he has been important to this offense in that role. But as far as the production, it's just not there. And as an example of that, Torrey's at over 300 offensive snaps, and I think Mack's at 70. Mack has generated 5 first downs and 1 touchdown. Torrey Smith has generated 5 first downs and 1 touchdown. And he's played 20% of the time. So you look at that production, and you saw him stretch the field on Monday night. So he's obviously got the speed to do it. He's very raw. I'm not claiming he's the answer at that position because he's got a long way to go. Just that I think at this stage he's probably a better alternative than Torrey Smith. But Doug Peterson spoke earlier in the week, and he doesn't seem to be at that point yet. What the Eagles have done, interestingly, over the past 3 weeks because of the ineffectiveness of Torrey Smith is played a lot more 13 personnel with 3 tight ends. So they've started putting Ertz, Selleck, and Trey Burton on the field together. So he's actually playing less, but it hasn't been Mack playing more. And I think at some point they might get to that point, but it won't be this week. It might be later in the season.
Okay, so, I mean, they brought in Torrey Smith to kind of fill that Deshaun Jackson role. Now, we know he's not Deshaun Jackson, but yet Torrey Smith has not worked out. Can Mack Hollins, I mean, he's not that right now either, but can they see him filling that role throughout the time? I mean, he's a 4th-round pick, but yet still, when he's been put in there, he's produced.
Yeah, I mean, Carson Wentz has thrown his way 6 times, and he's come up with 6 catches. Now, part of the reason for that is he's only out there very rarely, so obviously opposing defensive coordinators aren't paying a lot of attention to him. So he generally always sees single coverage. People aren't expecting him to get the ball, but you have to give him credit. He's had limited opportunities, and he's taken advantage of every single one of them. And to me, if football's a meritocracy, and that's what it's supposed to be, if somebody performs at that level, you have to increase their role and give them a chance to do more. I think the Eagles are getting to that point. But whether we ever get to the point where he's the starting outside receiver opposite Alshon Jeffrey, I'm not sure we're going to get there, at least this season.
Yeah, and, for the listeners out there who don't know a lot about Hollins and maybe had just seen him do his little dance the other night and that's about all they've seen of him, give us his reputation coming in, because we've heard a lot about, this guy's a special teams guy, but as a receiver, was he a guy that was supposed to be an every down receiver in the league, a specialized receiver in the league?
Well, I think early it was going to be specialized because he did have a lot of injury issues at North Carolina. Hadn't been able to stay on the field for long periods of time. But the one thing he did do was stretch the field. He's a 6'4", 220-pound kid who can run. And as an example, he's averaging 22.3 yards per catch in his 6 catches. And his last 2 years in North Carolina, his average per catch was 22.9. So it's stunningly similar, and it tells you that he can stretch the field. He is raw, though, as most rookie receivers are. But the thing is, because of his frame, because he is so big, already right now, and he's had also a very successful career on special teams at North Carolina, and that's continued here. So he's very physical, and today he's a better blocker than Torrey Smith, which helps in other ways, obviously. So there's a lot of attributes he has. My take on it isn't necessarily, as I said, that Mack is ready to be a starting NFL receiver, because I don't think he is, but he deserves more playing time simply because Torrey Smith is not doing the job.
Is it disappointing, John? Like, is it disappointing that Torrey Smith, you bought this guy in to be that type of guy, and yet we're 7 weeks in? Yeah, you're 6-1, but this guy isn't the guy that you thought that he was going to be, and now we're talking about a fourth-round rookie taking snaps away from him.
Well, I mean, I think they're a little bit disappointed. I don't want to overhype it to the point and say the Eagles didn't expect a ton from Torrey Smith. They brought him in to be a deep threat. I think he has provided that, even though it hasn't showed up in the statistics. Mike and I have talked about it a lot. It has opened the field for the intermediate routes that have been so successful, particularly for Zach Ertz, but even for Nelson Aguilar in the slot. So he has been impactful in that way, but at some point you do need some production. And I think as the season wears on and as opposing defenses get more tape on the Eagles' offense, they're going to start to realize, well, Torrey's not helping them catching the football, so we don't have to be that concerned with him going over the top. And I think that's the danger of not changing at all and just keep rolling it out there the same way you have, which is, if they do that, it's understandable, because the bottom line is this team is 6-1.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Another guy that's been getting a little bit of time is Marcus Johnson. Do you think he is in the fold either as well, or is either of those guys in for more playing time, or are they just trying to, show, as you kind of mentioned, catch the defense off guard?
No, it's interesting. I was going to write about that tomorrow. I just mentioned 13 personnel.
Yep.
Marcus has a more defined role. Over the past three or four games, when the Eagles have shifted to use more 3 tight end sets, that means there's only one receiver on the field. The vast majority of the time when they go to that formation, Marcus Johnson is the receiver on the field, which tells you a couple of things. The Eagles like his work as a blocker because they run the football about 85% of the time when they're in that personnel grouping. And it also gives him, as I said, a clearly defined role. So to this point, Torrey, if you look at it, he played about 90% of the snaps against Kansas City in week 2. That's been down to 56 and 63 over the past 2 weeks. So he has lost significant playing time, but it's been a combination of things. As I said, it's been more 3 tight end sets, a little bit from Mack Hollins and a little bit from Marcus Johnson. So all those things mixed in.
John, I want to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers situation with Martavis Bryant, as you also cover the league nationally. What is going on? Now I'm hearing that he's going to be inactive this week. He's been asking for a trade. He's been telling the Pittsburgh he wants to stay there. What is going on with Martavis Bryant, and what is going to be the resolution to the situation?
Well, it's pretty clear he wants out of Pittsburgh. He doesn't have nearly the role he thought he would be. He thought he would have, and he's complaining about it, which is, that's not the way to go about things, certainly with the way the Pittsburgh Steelers run their organization. And the fact that he's going on Instagram and kind of taking shots at Schuster and players that are performing better than he has, and people in Pittsburgh have said, we'll just move on. But also, Rose, this is a guy coming off a year-long suspension. So he's another failed drug test away from being gone indefinitely. So when you add that into the mix and you add his behavior into the mix, well, there's not a trade market for this guy of any value, and he is tremendously talented. So I think the hope is that Pittsburgh, the hope from Pittsburgh's standpoint is he grows up a little bit, he gets over this hurdle, maybe sits down for a week or two and comes back to be a contributor because he is talented and you can't get any value for him. So it's either just flat out cut him or try to start the reclamation project.
Hey, John, I want to pivot back to the Eagles real fast because Jim Schwartz did speak today, and he was asked about what the defense will be like, the changes without Jordan Hicks. And the funny part is he said, we've already played a lot without him, so they're used to it. But what does he anticipate that defense now lacking without Jordan Hicks?
I don't think he anticipates them lacking anything because of the way Nigel Bradham has played, and the Eagles expect Michael Kendricks back, and he's really having a career year as far as effectiveness when he's been out there. So I think they're comfortable if they have those two guys out there. I was talking to Josh off air. Jim was kind of funny talking about the communication aspect of it. He said, we overblow the green sticker on the helmet, and you could put a tape recorder out there and he could do that job. So it was classic Jim Schwartz. But so that part is overblown. And the truth is they have played a lot without Jordan Hicks because he's dealt with the ankle injury, the calf injury. Now he's gone for the year. So that's the positive part. The negative part, though, is Jordan Hicks, when he's healthy, which hasn't been very much this year, but you saw it last year, he's a heck of a football player.
Yeah.
And he's the Eagles' best linebacker. So they are going to miss him. The hope was that he would get healthier as the season wore on. That's obviously out the window. The good news is Nigel Bradham is having a career year, and Michael Kendricks, as I said, isn't far behind.
So in a typical game then, you've got Kendricks and Bradham. How much will they be on the field, and how much is Najee Good and now Joe Walker? Like, what are their roles? How much? Because when we had Hicks out there with Bradham, we very rarely saw Kendricks or anybody else for that matter. Those two guys got most of the snaps. You used to say it all the time. Look, Kendricks is a starter, but they only play two, so he doesn't really start in that vein because they don't need him. So typically there's only two guys out there. So is it going to be 80% Kendricks and Bradham? How's that breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. People have to get used to throwing away those conventional depth charts because you're in nickel anywhere from a low game is probably 60% up to 80%, depending on the opponent you're facing. Now, you look at San Francisco, you probably will have to use a little more base because they're going to play a rookie quarterback, most likely. They have Carlos Hyde, and they run the football, or at least try to run the football. So you're going to see a little bit more Joe Walker. He's the middle linebacker in the base defense. And then when they go to the nickel, that's where Bradham and Michael Kendricks chime in. So you're going to be having those guys. Nigel and Michael are going to be the three down linebackers. They're the guys who are going to be on the field every single play, pretty much, if they're healthy. And you saw it without Michael Kendricks. If he's not able to go, and because of his injury history, at some point you'd have to believe he's going to miss some time. That's where Najee fits in. He's the next guy up in the nickel. But in base defense, when it's just a traditional 4-3, I think it's going to be Joe Walker as the middle linebacker, and that's what it has been to this point. But the Eagles don't use that defensive formation very much in today's era of football.
All right, plenty more on this Eagles and 49ers matchup. Real quick, John, before we move on, nationally we got the trade deadline coming up. Are there any Eagles that you think would be a possibility to be that have the possibility of being moved?
No, I would think if anything, you sort of take on a baseball mentality, and if you think the window is open, and the window is open, I would think the Eagles are more likely to bring somebody in than ship somebody out. You would think about disgruntled players. I would think before the Jordan Hicks injury, Michael Kendricks would have fit into that category, but now he's a big part of this football team. So I don't even think that enters into it. So I would think they would be buyers, if anything, not sellers.
All right, the deadline coming up. We'll see if Howie Roseman pulls another rabbit out of his hat. And by the way, there was one trade today. Inman goes from L.A. Chargers to Chicago Bears. The Steelers have benched Martavius Bryant. It looks like he won't play. And in other news, Simeon Rice wants to make a comeback to the NFL. He's 40.
So does Terrell Owens.
John, I appreciate it, man. We'll talk again tomorrow.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you, guys.